books, 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 ting, books, 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 ting, books, 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 ting, books, 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 ting. Shelve it!
Recording in progress.
Progress, baby. That means the book club has started.
All right.
Look at the backdrop. That's like insane.
My son and partner, and no doubt my dog as well, were mocking me this morning, but I was like, I have to get everyone out of the house. Set up, because it's not the primary reason for having these books, but like I don't really get that many visitors in rural Wiltshire, so I really enjoy. I'm grateful for the opportunity to show off my fine collection of Penguin paperbacks.
And what a fine collection it is. It's outstanding. I almost want to hinge and zoom so I can go through every one.
It's a personal weakness. I'm like a recovering alcoholic. I stopped drinking 15 years ago, so it's like ancient history. But it's like it's like the law of thermodynamics. You know, it's like if you're the sort of person who's got an addictive nature, or you pick up addictions or habits really easily, you never get rid of it. And what I've found is it's best just to channel it into something kind of constructive. So when I gave up drinking, I fell prey to all sorts of other kind of habits, and some of them were pretty kind of like worse than drinking really. But eventually I've managed to funnel it into kind of collecting books, which is like buying secondhand books from brick and mortar bookshops is I see it as a victimless crime.
Which brings me on to this book club that we've got is all just about what I read, basically, and people are joining me. And if you want to read the same book as me, go for your life, and then we'll chat about it. And if you don't, then that's fine. So this month it was Paul Bowles, Let It Come Down. And the reason why I chose this one, right, is because my friend Simon, this brings me on to recommendations. My friend Simon got me into reading, lent me loads of books years and years ago. And my friend Darren first lent me American Psycho. And that was the first time that I ever realized that reading could be something other than just a top-down thing. Because I always used to think it was like, Jane Eyre and reading about all these posh people that had nothing to do with my life, And you're reading American Psycho, it's about bloody serial killers and the swearing in it. And I'm like 14. And he's just like, fucking hell, this is what books can be. I like reading now because I've found my people, sort of thing. And then after that, like sort of these two guys, Spacey and Simon, they lent me a lot of books. And so it was like they lent me Bukowski, and they lent me Brautigan, and they lent me Bernard McLaverty, and I got into Arthur C. Clarke through them and all that sort of thing. And Simon's my mate, and he's someone I trust for books. So in lockdown, I was like, what the hell should I read now? I'm in a rut. Do you know what I mean? And he goes, well, have you tried any Paul Bowles? And I said, do you know what? No, I haven't. So I read The Sheltering Sky.
Yeah.
Which I really quite enjoyed, actually. And then I was thinking about books to read, and I thought, well, I'll get another Bowles because I liked the original Bowles, the Sheltering Sky one. So I've just read this, and yeah, this is what we hang the book club around. But really, I don't talk much about books because as I say, if you talk about books, it sort of spoils the book. And I think books are very personal to people who read it.
Is Let It Come Down? See, I read this when I was about 18, and for numerous, mainly beer-related reasons, I can't remember. Is it the short story collection?
No, this one is about this guy called Dyer, and he goes and he works over in Tangier, and he falls in love with a prostitute, and then I feel like I'm going to tell everyone like the ending of it now. Oh
no, you shouldn't do that. I mean, I know, right?
And he's basically gets a job there as in money. It's like on an exchange. He's like doing this money exchange thing. And he goes there and he realizes the job isn't what it is. He starts wandering around the local area, goes to a brothel that he doesn't realize is a brothel, but soon as discovered it is, falls in love with this prostitute, and then things go very south from there, without giving too much away. So it's that really. But when I remember when I emailed you and said, oh, will you come and talk about Paul Bowles? He said, oh yeah, I used to be into him. I read him a while ago, but he's a bit problematic now.
So
let's talk about why Paul Bowles.
So here's the thing, like most, not most, a significant proportion of good art is problematic. And I think, you know, like, I'm not saying people have to do this. I'm saying that I personally choose to separate the art from the artist. And maybe that's my privilege as a white guy. But I think what I wanted to say was, like, I'm a bit more aware of that these days. When I was 18, you know, 19, 20, I loved the beats, you know, like Bukowski was my thing. So was William Burroughs. And from that, I would read all of the stuff that was satellited around, including Bowles. And I like The Sheltering Sky that's almost like that came very early on. And I guess, interestingly enough, like Luke and I have been talking a lot about Prick Up Your Ears, the biography.
Oh, yeah, I love that.
Recently.
Yeah, it's a brilliant book. I knew nothing about Joe Orton when I read that book, and it was fucking fantastic.
And it's just, again, you know, you've got these kind of white guys from a relatively affluent kind of white Western country going to essentially lose themselves and have pleasure at the expense of like young, like North African men, you know. And it's just like, I guess that these days I've got like a different understanding of the power imbalance between the white people Bowles is talking about and the characters from Tangier and Morocco, North Africa, who are othered, but also the kind of like, you know, they have like this kind of, they have a relationship that's out of whack with the white characters completely because of money, because of colonial issues, and because of race. But having said that, I think, like, if you enjoyed that, I'd say read the short stories. I remember Sheltering Sky got made into one of the most obnoxious films I've ever seen. It's got Timothy Spall and John Malkovich in it. But here's what I've got into via Paul Bowles more recently. He was given money. He was given a grant to go around making field recordings of jujuka musicians in Morocco. And actually, I think it was Dust to Digital put out this amazing kind of compilation of his sound recordings of, like, you know, he'd go around, like, he took it very seriously. He'd go around like villages, and like these musicians would be doing the Leela, which is like a very important kind of like Sufi based kind of trance inducing music ritual to commune with the dead. And the music's amazing, you know.
Yeah, he talks about that, the Sufi dance in this book. He's a composer, Paul Bowles.
Well,
a music composer as well. And I actually listened, if you look on Spotify, there's like one or two of his tracks, and I listened to it and it was really good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I was just like, it's just interesting when one door opens another, like you say. But I have to look out for those field recordings. How would I find them?
Have a look on Bandcamp and go to the Dust to Digital homepage. And if they don't already have them streaming, which I'm pretty sure they do, but if they don't, then there'll definitely be a link to the website where you can, you know, buy it.
And I think this is an interesting conversation to have, is when you're reading books that are quite old, because I remember when I got recommended Paul Bowles, when I read it, I instantly thought, this feels older than like the beat stuff in a way, because I think it maybe was 10 years by about 10 years old.
I guess you should say he's like a proto-beat. And also, I don't want to just single out Paul Bowles. They were all problematic, you know. Charles Bukowski, like, who I think he's the obvious one to say. And I love his poetry, you know. He's got a definite gift for putting words together. But even at the time, even in 1989, I knew that Women and Post Office, those books are rank, really. They're kind of very, very, they're in a very like dark moral area, which I'm not totally down with. But William Burroughs, I mean, like, you know, he was like the golden boy when I was younger, William Burroughs, but he was like a wife murdering sex tourist trust fund kid, you know. I don't think like you can really look at any of the beats and think that they're great people. They're not, you know. And I do think it's like healthy to bear in mind the sort of things we bear in mind these days about kind of where are the female voices, where are the people of color, you know. I mean, to be fair to the Beats, they did have quite a few working class voices, which is one thing in their favor. But, you know, I just stop short of saying, well, you shouldn't read them. I think you should read them, but just bear all this stuff in mind, you know.
It's funny because I was actually reading one of my favorite books, actually, is the stuff by Mark Twain. You know, it's Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And I thought, right, I'm going to read, because I've got a 10-year-old lad, and I was like, right, I'm going to read him Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, one or the other. So I took the book off my shelf, started to read it to him. I was one page in and I was like, this is horrific, you know, like, so I was just like, no, I can't read him that, you know. But interestingly enough, as an adult, I could still read that book and enjoy it for what it is, having that context in my mind of that was the time that it was written. And also, you can enjoy a book and I think also be shocked and horrified inside yourself about how those times were back then. Do you know what I mean?
Also, I mean, like, sometimes as well, it's not as clear. It's not as clear cut, you know. Like, there are gradations as well. So, for example, like my son, like John, he has like fairly pronounced dyslexia. So even though he's 12, we still do a lot of reading together, you know. And his middle name is like Atticus. And, you know, he got to the age like a year or so ago where, you know, I could have this conversation by saying, look, you're not named after Atticus Finch from To Kill a Mockingbird, but there is like a specific meaning to the name Atticus, which means ethical, which I kind of want you to understand. And we could do well to read the book together. And we did read it together. And there's a lot of really, really racially charged language in it. But she used that language on purpose in order to kind of like draw to attention to kind of more middle class liberal readers what the actual situation in her day was. And also, like, I think if it's coming from that sort of perspective, it allows you to have like a frank conversation with your kids about it's not just like that you can't use this language, but I want you to understand just how grim the times were this language, where people felt it was fine to use this language, you know. It really, really annoys me how the kind of editing of books has been kind of spun into being a culture wars thing. I mean, like, books have always been edited. And like this whole thing, it was really, really cynical about the Roald Dahl books being edited, and then the story being spun that they're being Bowdlerized, when actually they're just, you know, there was a whole raft of different things going in the Roald Dahl books, and some of them, a small percentage of them, were very justified, you know. Like, there's absolutely no way that kind of racial slur should be bandied about in books for kids. But then there were other things which were just really whack, poorly judged value. You know, they were just like, they seem to be just like knee-jerk, very contemporary, like minor issues. However, this has always happened to books. You know, like the Reader's Digest have always edited books. There is a notorious Agatha Christie book which had a very, very poor title until relatively recently. You know, like there's a Joseph Conrad book that had the N-word in the title as well, you know, and like it's absolutely right that these books should be edited and have this thing removed, because the conversation, I think, really needs to be led by people of color. You know, like there's a certain degree to which, if you're talking about the N-word, well, it's not really up to me, is it? You know, we need to ask kind of people of color who they're the people who have to go into bookshops and be faced with this stuff. We need to ask them what they think. But generally speaking, I don't think there's anything kind of wrong with editing really, really harsh stuff out of kids' books. If like kids might see it on their own and not have the context for it, then I feel that it should be, you know.
I think it's all about context, because actually, I just wouldn't read what Mark Twain to my little lad at the moment because of that. And if there was an edited version of Mark Twain without some of the racial language that's used, or racist language that's used, I would read it to him, because they're cracking stories and they're so bloody funny, Mark. Yeah. Brilliant. But also, I really love to preserve the original, because that gives context to everything. Do you know what I mean? It gives context to when he was writing, what was going on, the vernacular, the language, what it was okay to be like back then. And I think that that's really important to keep. So I don't think there's any reason why there shouldn't be two versions of everything, like the original, and then the...
Sure, and it's not difficult, you know, if you want a quote unquote unbowdlerized version, it's not difficult to get on eBay or A-Books and just buy an old copy. And like we were saying at the start, you know, but what do books cost? They cost like 50p each, you know, like they cost £1, you know. And
going back to this Paul Bowles one, it's a little bit reminded me, I don't know whether, have you read like much Graham Greene and like The Old Man in Havana and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I've not read that book, but yeah. I mean, he was a nasty, he's another nasty guy, Graham Greene, but they all were, all of them. So yeah, I mean, like not
it's kind of like colonial, you know, this like white privileged guy goes out to the colonies, and this is his idea of the exotic, if you will. But actually, you have to read it through those eyes to make you feel like that person. And actually, you end up feeling sorry for him. And sometimes, yeah, you actually end up more feeling sorry for the characters. Do you know what I mean? And almost feeling, yeah, just like you feel pity for them rather than anything else from a modern context. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So how about for a future one?
Right, I'm putting that down. I'm screenshotting that.
Yeah, do it. Honestly.
Is it good?
Yeah, it's amazing. It's like, yeah, like fantastic science fiction, you know? You know, I'm about to say, oh, it should be taught in schools. I don't know what's taught in schools. Maybe it is taught in schools, but if it isn't, it should be. There you go.
Oh my God, because I was going to ask you book recommendations.
So I've got
Come on, John.
I've got 3 piles in front of me. You want me to, like, which one do you want first? I've got my current pile, I've got my personal influences pile, and I've got a pile of books that I press on other people.
Okay, this is brilliant. Let's go for the personal influences. Let's start at the beginning.
Okay, so when I give up drinking, there were 2. I was like an angry, nihilistic, anti-natalist, like kind of suicidal, really. Very, very negative person. And there were 2 books over the first 5 years of sobriety that really gave me a framework to rebuild my personal philosophy. So I would cautiously recommend these to anyone. and that is Straw Dogs by John Gray. John Gray, Straw Dogs, this really relates to addiction in that this is like a criticism of the idea of free will, and it's sort of saying that man sees himself as being apart from animals, but really man's just another animal and he doesn't have free will. He says this amazing thing at the beginning saying there's not going to be like there is no, hang on. So why this book chimed to me is like most kind of like people in thrall to an addiction, I believed that I was free, as in, I'm going to ignore all of society's constraints, and it doesn't matter that it's 10 a.m. I'm going to have a line of speed and open a can of beer because I'm like kind of living free. But I wasn't free. I was the most trapped person of all. And I think like there's an idea in recovery about appreciating the things you can't change and the things you can change. And for me, like coming face to face with the idea that most of my life was already mapped out for me on the day that I was born because of genetics, where I was born, the social lumpen proletariat class that I was born into, and stuff that was handed down to me via my teachers and my parents, and that defines much of what your life is going to be like. And by really facing up to that fact, which is really depressing in the first instance, you thinking, oh Christ, I've like so much of my life is just mapped out for me. But then that helps you to concentrate on the little bit that isn't, So by concentrating on the little bit that isn't, I'm hoping that, I've managed to sort of start improving different things about my life. And the other, sorry, this is really grim, we'll do some happier stuff in a second, is to do with kind of depression. I've had really a lot of problems with kind of like depression, like in my youth especially. And this book, again, initially it was a revelation, and it wasn't a positive revelation. It kind of did my head in when I first read it, but it was stopping to think about mental health through the lens of like capitalism. And it really, again, after several rereadings, I started to get kind of really positive stuff out of it. So I'd recommend those two books for anyone. The book that I've read more than any other, and I don't even know if I'm recommending it, but it just, for me, it lights something up in my head. I read it first when I was 16. My English teacher, Stephen Sutherland, he pressed this book on me. And he said, read this, you'll love it. And I did. And I kind of read it all the time since. I got this copy from City Lights Bookshop in San Francisco. What a trip, man. Seriously. But it's Butler by Flannery O'Connor.
I've never read it. And this is just music to my ears, because finding books from people who I know are into books that I'm into, and if I find them and I've not read them, that's just gold for me. So thank you for that. this
is, do you know that comedy sketch that Stuart Lee does? I think he's like in conversation with a taxi driver, and he just keeps on repeating, like, it's like, you know, they'll put you in prison for saying that these days.
I don't think I know that one exactly. I know a lot of Stuart Lee's repetitive stuff.
Yeah, so like that's like this, but like a novel version. It's insane, right? So it's like set in, I think it's set about 100 years ago or 80 years ago in Vienna, and it's this angry guy, and he's like a failed artist, and he's at a party, and he's sitting in this uncomfortable chair, and he's just waiting for other people to turn up so they can go through to the next room and eat a meal, and that's all that happens in it. And you're reading it, and at first you're like, feel like I'm going mad. If he doesn't get on with it soon, I'm just going to lose the plot. And then you realize that that's the whole point of it. And by the end, like, I was just like howling, laughing, just thinking, he's going to start, I'm going to turn over the page, and he's going to start going on about how uncomfortable the chair is again. And he does, and you're just like, fucking hell, this is amazing. Like, you know, yeah. So this book took me to the edge of sanity and back. And Thomas Bernhard, I've started reading a lot of books by him, and like they're all in a similar vein. He's got this incredibly addictive style. So yeah, so those are my personal choices.
Now, what are you reading at the moment?
So what I'm reading at the moment is I'm about an hour away from finishing this, Psychnauts by Mike J, which is great. I'm just in the middle. A lot of my reading is to do with work, you know, and that's not to say that there's anything bad about it. Like, this is great, really enjoyed it. It made me think of the Philip Larkin line about, you know, sex being invented between the Lady Chatterley band and the first Beatles LP, in that a lot of us, we kind of think about, you know, we were just talking about the Beats just before, like boomers and people like from that generation, they've got this icy grip on culture. And we sort of think at the back of our heads, don't we? You know, like this, it's not just that they invented sex in the 60s, it's like they invented drugs as well. And this is like a corrective to this. This is like the story of all of these people from the 18th and 19th century who were way more far out than the beatniks, you know what I mean? Like the people who discovered like nitrous oxide, like it's got a whole chapter on Freud and how mad he was for cocaine and stuff like that. And it's brilliant. It's just like, it's a much needed corrective to kind of casual ideas about the history of drugs. And then what's coming up straight after that is my dear pal and co-editor's book, Men at War. Men at War, as it's being called in some circles. And this is like Luke's second book. He wrote Out of the Woods about his kind of like experiences with kind of bisexuality. And this is more about, it's more of the stuff that he's really interested in, which is like the kind of English character warfare and like how men are with each other and the kind of complexity of their kind of like, you know, spirituality and sexuality at the same time. So yeah, really looking forward to that.
My God, thank you thanks so much for the recommendations, because I tell you what, often, because I do consider myself quite widely read, and people will say like, oh, you know, try this. I'm like, oh no, yeah, I've read that. But all of the ones that you recommended there, I've not read any of them. So that's brilliant. And I trust you, which is good.
No problem.
Do you know what I mean? Because it's good to trust people. I mean, I don't know how you stand with book recommendations, but sometimes I'm just like, I do get quite edgy when people recommend and they'll go, oh, that's great, you love that. And I think, will I? Do you really know me? Do you know what I like?
More than anything else, I only take book recommendations from friends. Mm-hmm. Like if I was looking for a restaurant, I wouldn't be that bothered about what friends said. I would definitely be looking at Trustpilot or, you know, Rate Your Restaurant or whatever. With records, you know, you can try before you buy, so you can I just kind of make my own mind up about stuff. With books, I have had it up to here, no disrespect to the few friends that I have who work in bookshops at all, but I just like, you know, like if I see a card written about underneath oh, you know, you'll laugh, you'll cry, I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
I will do. Whatever you say, I'll do is what I won't.
There's too much weirdness goes on in bookshops about who gets racked in the windows and the kind of authors that they have to be pushing and stuff like that. I've got a list of books that I buy for other people, and sometimes they're kind of popular books, but sometimes they're not. So, for example, like if I was gonna, like these are the books that I kind of buy copies of to send to people, and now like a lot of people have heard of this book because it's like a huge prize-winning book. It's absolutely amazing. It deserves the kind of like, you know.
Again, I've not read it, so this is brilliant.
It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. It's like an eco crime like novel. It won the Nobel, and quite deservedly so. She's brilliant. Fitzcarraldo are amazing. Like that, I love like probably, as with the penguins behind me, I love the simplicity of this design. When they do fiction, it's in this beautiful indigo color. And when they do non-fiction, it's in like an eggshell white color, and they look amazing on your shelves or whatever. And then also, you know, I think I've seen everywhere I go, I see Ben's, it's not even his latest anymore. He's had Cuddy out since then. But because this is to do with kind of a couple of people making crop circles in Wiltshire, like this really resonates with me because it's like kind of set literally where I live, you know?
Yeah.
But then having said that, these two books I buy for a lot of people, and I don't hear enough people talking about them.
I've never read them.
So Darren these are both written by people who write for the Quietus. So maybe I'm biased, but I don't think so. Darren wrote this incredible autobiography about growing up in, I think it was in Derry, in the 80s and 90s during the Troubles. And it is like, it's formally quite experimental, but also very moving. It's very funny, and it's very kind of dark and beautifully written. And I was just like a few of us at the Quietus, we were like, why hasn't this book become like a sensation? It's incredible. Having said that, he won this was 2 years ago, and he's just won this like £170,000 Wyndham Prize, I think it is called, for like really good authors in Ireland. So that's kind of changed his life. He'd been working in a warehouse stacking boxes before that, and now he can actually, you know, like punch his card for the last time and go and sit down and write all the time. But if you're ever on the Quietus and you put Darren's name into the search engine, everything he writes about is brilliant for us. He's a machine. I don't know how he does it. Pretty jealous. Let's move on. And this book is brilliant. Again, like this came out, Jennifer Lucy Allen came out a couple of years ago. She's definitely working on something else at the moment, but I would say buy this book. It's really unique. I read a lot of books on music and sound, and it becomes a bit like a busman's holiday. Even the good ones, you're a bit like, oh, like another book on music. Fantastic. This is about, it's so unique. It's about how she loves the sound of foghorns. So she goes around visiting lighthouses and foghorns, and she gives like a social and cultural history of them. It's packed with really brilliant stories, which I really love in books. You know, you can tell when someone's done a lot of research. You know, they really put in the hours at the British Library and dug up all those great foghorn related facts. So there you go. The last one that I sent to a lot of people, and I remember the first time I ever talked to you, I recommended this to you, and that's this one.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Now,
it's so good, isn't it?
And in fact, I'm on with next. I've just finished Sula by Toni Morrison, and now I'm on with what's his one? The Book of Strange Things.
Yeah.
That's what I'm reading now. But Crimson Petal and the White, it's just outstanding, isn't it?
Yeah. Like mass market, like so-called mass market literature. I mean, I grew up like my parents were really weird. They would they wouldn't let me listen to pop music on the radio, and they wouldn't let me watch anything like Grange Hill on the TV, but they would let me get any book I wanted out of the library. So when I was 10, in junior school, I read Jaws by Peter Benchley, right? I remember being
like? I can't imagine what the book would be like of Jaws.
I loved it, but I very much remember reading the first few pages and going to myself, what's a moist vagina? I have no idea what's going on in this book. And I was like, just skip over all this stuff. Let's get straight down to the fish-eating people.
I can't even remember any sex at the beginning of Jaws.
So, like in the book, the sheriff's wife is having an affair with the marine biologist. It was very 70s. The book is very 70s. It's got loads of sex and drinking and stuff like that in it. So it's a lot, you know, with Spielberg's very much like, let's pare this back to the proper story, which is just the shark and the people. But then also after Peter Benchley, I got really into horror. Like, I still to this day, I love reading horror, but Stephen King, you know, all the way through school, like The Stand, The Shining. I've read The Shining probably more than any other book by Wise Blood or Catch-22, you know. So yeah, Stephen King, I would say. But all of this stuff, I always feel for work, there are so many kind of authors I haven't read that might be helpful to me because of work, that I always think, like, I don't believe in guilty pleasures, but the idea of just reading for pleasure, the pleasure of having a page turner or whatever, I always think maybe I'll be lucky enough to retire at the age of 70. And then if I'm really lucky, I might have a decade where I can just sit on a sun lounger and read books. And that's when I'm going to think, right, where's my copy of Carrie or The Shining or whatever? That's when I'm going to go back to my big.
I mean, I make it part of my ritual. There's never a day that I don't read, you know, and I still drink. So, you know, I come back from, you know, going out or whatever, and I'm absolutely shit faced, and I will still be reading. I'll still be like,
do you not read the same sentence over and over again, though?
Of course I do. And then I put it down, and then the next night when I'm, you know, sober, I'll be like, right, go on, skip back a few pages. Where was I? Yeah, it's like a ritual. I have to do it. And again, I don't know whether it's an addictive personality thing, or whether it's just an OCD thing, or whether it's just an enjoyment of books thing. But even when I go camping, like if I'm at a festival, playing a festival over a weekend, that will be out every night, and I'll have a torch. And whatever time I go to bed, whether it's 3, 4, 5 in the morning, I will be there with a torch, reading at least one page to say it's been done. So, you know, it's just nice to meet another bibliophile. And I knew this would be cracking talking to you, John. I feel like a kindred spirit, love. And we must do it again.
Thanks for asking me.
Thank you for chatting. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. All right, rock on. See you later.